He said, this staff at Seacoast is made up of many people who are a little skeptical of megachurches. Fair?
I wouldn't disagree with that.
We're seeing at a deeper level because I don't think many of our personalities would gravitate towards a megachurch sort of environment.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah, you agree with that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I'm laughing because, yeah.
Just because I don't believe or agree doesn't mean I can't learn from you.
Why did you have to bring that up?
Okay, that one I'm super embarrassed about.
Do you like me?
Do I like you?
Yeah.
As an individual or as a podcast?
Just as a person.
No, I like you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I don't have any interest in appearing to be stronger than I am.
I ain't bow to Nebuchadnezzar's statue. He gonna lead. You feel me?
How do we love people who see the world differently than we do?
What would it look like if we truly loved all of our neighbors? Could listening to their stories be the first step? This is Seacoast Church, and there's way more to talk about.
All right, well, Jeff Leinberger, good to have you with us.
Hey, good to be here, man.
I think you, outside of like the regular flow of hosts, you got to be on this the most, man.
Yeah, I guess I'm well liked. I don't know.
Yeah,
what
you
it is.
are.
The ratings go up when I'm on.
They do, man.
I don't know what it is.
I wanted to ask you: is there still like some boss dynamics right here?
No.
No.
I don't even know him.
You don't know him.
The only boss dynamics is when it comes to lunch. What are we doing for lunch? That's pretty much the only time we interact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somehow he still finds a way to torture me and make me go to crazy places I would never go to.
You got to give me an example now. You can't just throw something out there.
Spice Indian, Pokey Brothers, yeah.
None,
yeah.
El Molino's.
El Molino.
I rock with El Molino.
You like Molino, yeah.
Hey, I do remember getting together with you guys for lunch. It was probably the crew with Chip and John also, and one of y'all was on some sort of health kick, and it was the worst lunch ever. From beginning to end, I was like, why are we here if we're going to eat this?
It was the pokey. It was that was the worst.
What is wrong with poke bowls?
That was the worst meal I've ever eaten.
Just for the record.
And by the way,
us Southern boys.
And by the way, I think it was because of me that we were there.
No, I
think it was either me or Jeff, but I tried to go like that day. I thought, man, I'm gonna really eat something healthy today, and it was literally the worst thing I've ever had.
I got two funny stories with T. So we went to Poke Brothers one time, and there was about four of us. And we walk in, and T doesn't get anything, and all of a sudden he disappears. He went next door to Jersey Mike's and brought his food back in. And then one time we were at Main Squeeze getting a smoothie, and it was me, you, and Sam, and we all did a wheatgrass shot. And I think Sam and T almost
so much
puked.
of the story out. He was fasting. Him. So me, trying not to make my brother stumble, I'm going to get this too. So then we just sell out. Sam gets this black bean burrito that's like this big and $12. And we're like, well, if we're here, let's go all the way out. It literally felt like we were playing football at Bishop England and just got face planted to the grass. It was terrible. No.
How long were y'all on a staff together that Jeff was leading?
9 years.
9 years.
Yeah, 9 years.
Roy was my boss in high school. I know y'all have heard about that. Hey, did you ever believe? Ever believe that rumor?
Really? That he bullied you? Absolutely.
Oh, that's a perfect example right there. Because I talk about it all the time, and I'm like, did anybody ever believe that? Most people
100%. 100%.
And I started that. I started a lie. And people still buy into it, Roy.
I got nothing.
Hey, I wanted to share something that I thought was funny between the two of us. I got to be kind of, careful with this one, but y'all listen how old I'm getting. My mind is going awry here. So I was being on the digital team. I was on the computer for the Good Friday service. Mm-hmm. So a very serious service. So this is a funny thing that happened. So I'm sitting there, and they had that part where people were talking in like different languages and all of that. And then someone got up to do the sign language. Y'all, I was like, whoever they're translating for, I can't hear it. I actually went to my computer settings to make sure the volume had... Does
that not surprise you?
Like for 5 seconds, I was like, how did the sound... Do I need to call Ryan Scott and tell him the sound's gone? And then I was like, oh my God. gosh. Can you believe that? You're uncomfortable to laugh right now.
I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain on how that could happen, but
that's bad, man. I'm getting old. All right. Well, anyway, thank you guys for being here. Y'all committed to 3 weeks in a row. So this episode, we are talking to a guy named Jim Wellman, who wrote a book that is a research on megachurches, and he entered it into from a very unbiased perspective, and so he kind of delivers whether or not megachurches are a good thing for this world. So that's what people will hear for this episode. And then next week we have a Christian futurist.
Wow.
And we're going to talk a lot of AI stuff. And then I wrote these names down so I wouldn't make 2 weeks from now. The futurist is Mal Fletcher. And then 2 weeks from now we have Benjamin Ironside Copeland, I think his last name is. He is a Christian, a movie director, and he just released a movie called Pastor's Kid that has foul language in it.
Wow. It sounds more like a WWF name, though.
But he also brought the main actress, Courtney Bandico. I think I said it right. You don't think that's like, whoa, I mean, here's what's funny is I did a little bit of digging and I was like, this Pastor's Kid, the movie sounds interesting, the premise and all of that. But I was thinking anybody who says from kind of an advertisement perspective, hey, he's looked at as kind of edgy, pushing the envelope, you kind of have a skepticism, or at least I do. It's just like, well, if you have to come right out and say I'm edgy. But I was like, whoa, there's not too many Christian directors who are letting curse words fly. What do you think about that, Roy?
You've seen it already?
I haven't seen the movie yet.
Okay.
No, but I have talked to these two. So anyway, interesting stuff. All right, so with this guy and his book is called High on God, and I will tell you guys to eliminate any suspense. It's actually a very favorable results of his research as far as megachurches are concerned. Jacques the Third, which is the lesser, he actually said this, and it really resonated, and I wanted to see what y'all thought. He said that Seacoast staff, and this is just Jack's opinion, it's not our lead pastor's opinion, nobody's opinion but Jack's, but I resonated with it. He said this staff at Seacoast is made up of many people who are a little skeptical of megachurches.
Fair.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
Like y'all would definitely be like, that would.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of what makes this place so special. A is that Seacoast has no problem with that. And B, I think that for us to be here at Seacoast, we have to see something deeper, and that deeper would be we see God's hand at work. We see that this is a special place. So we're seeing at a deeper level because I don't think many of our personalities would gravitate towards a megachurch sort of environment. But this is this is where we are connected.
Yeah. I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've all, being around here a long time, the celebrity pastor type thing, it turns us all off, and, we know that that's not our DNA here. And even though we are categorized as a megachurch, we don't see the same things that you see, out there.
Yeah. Yeah. You agree with that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I'm laughing because maybe, and obviously maybe sometimes it crosses the line, but I'm thinking about our times at maybe certain conferences that we've been to together, that we as a staff team, campus pastors, we feel like misfits in that world of megachurch pastors and stuff because
I was at an art conference one time and I'll never forget it just becoming too much, like just at that moment. And what I mean by that, listeners, is it is a great time for people. It's a great time for us. There's so much learning to do, but it is a big production. Yep. And sometimes, depending on your personality, it can be a little overwhelming. And so this was a huge learning experience for me. It was, not only was I overwhelmed, but my cynicism was kind of going through the roof. And I remember, I'm going to take a little break. So I started to exit and I was feeling just so, I don't know what the word is, I was a mess inside because I think part of that was me, honestly, and my cynicism. But I walked by Chip and he was like, "Hey, where are you going?" And I was just like, I just kind of need a break from all of this. And I'll never forget, he looked at me so calmly and he said, yeah, me too. But I was an emotional basket case where Chip was just like, it's no big deal. Right. And I was like, okay, that's a grown man way of responding to something that you kind of feel a little bit out of place on.
Well, I think we've been in environments before, some conference environments where, you go to you go sit down at a local restaurant and you can tell every single person that walks in the door that's there for the pastor's conference. You can tell they're all part of it. A team. They dress alike. They look alike. There's just a look about kind of that prototypical and so I hate to say it, we laugh a little bit, but our team is a hodgepodge for sure. Right. We definitely don't fit the mold. Even honestly, and I've said this before, I honestly mean this in the most respectful way possible. Like, I think that's what it begins at the very top of our organization. Like when I think about, when I think about Pastor Greg, like I love him to death. Nobody was ever going to accuse Pastor Greg of being the coolest guy in the right. But that's what makes Greg, and that's what makes Seacoast. And he wasn't trying to play that part. He wasn't trying to play. He's just comfortable being himself.
Right. And here's like a little play on words. Because of what you just described, he is cool. That to me is cool. Is I can look up to this guy and he's not really trying to be like all the other. And I'm not saying that anything's wrong, I guess, with trying to keep up with all the trends and be cool and stuff. But I don't know. For some people,
we get Pastor Greg some skinny jeans, an oversized tee, and some Chelsea boots. There you go. And let's just see if he can rock it.
I will say Roy's haircut is kind of teetering on that pastor.
This is my midlife crisis. So if this is as bad as it gets, I think everybody's pretty happy.
Do you remember that one time? At the ARC conference where it was completely empty? And there was one guy sitting up in the back row, and we bet Joey that he wouldn't go sit right next to that guy. He did it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, imagine a gigantic church that basically the conference is emptied, and there's one random person
on his laptop,
sitting all the way at the top on his laptop. And you dared me to go up there.
And you did it.
And I did. And I could see peripherally that he kind of like looked at me for a second, like, "What are you doing?" And he left. He's like, "I can't take this."
I would have left too. I would have run.
I'd forgotten that. That was.
What did you win?
What's that?
Oh no, he did. It didn't. There was no bet. It was just I dared him to do it, and he did it.
Of course, I'll do that. T. Hey, would you say megachurches are stereotypically a white thing? Like when you think megachurches, does the black community think, "Oh yeah, white"? Churches, because there's definitely some megachurches.
There's definitely some black megachurches, but generally.
Yeah. Do you ever get like really when you say that you're a pastor at Seacoast, because Seacoast is a very known church here in Charleston, and do people ever just like, oh, wow, oh, cool, like thinking, oh, black guy, I thought that was a white church. Like, do you ever get anything like that?
Yeah.
Yeah. But is it a look or is it an actual question? Oh, really? So you're a pastor?
Well, I always say I'm the campus pastor at Seacoast North, and they're like, North Charleston? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, and that's a good delineation, right? Because if you said, hey, I'm Dream Center, that's not an odd thing. But Seacoast as a whole, maybe that would be.
I can bet you $50 right now. My line of questioning and how I just said that made Roy uncomfortable.
I'm like, here we go again. How did we end up here again?
But this is different. Like we have.
I'm his black friend. He can ask those questions.
That's not true. Whatever.
So we're not friends?
No, we're friends. You made it singularly. Like you're my only black friend.
Hey, all I can say is, Lynn, if you're listening out there, at least it wasn't you this time.
Here's the thing: is I know a lot of people in like the Northwest. And they don't realize that unless you are overtly a racist person that tries to avoid interactions, when you live in Charleston, South Carolina, you know black and white people. Yeah, you just do. That is who lives here. And a lot of people don't get that, which is kind of interesting. All right, so I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking with you guys for 2 more weeks, so there's a lot that we're going to talk about, but I figured that we would end this here. And I'm curious, what would be some of y'all's most significant fears? And I'll lead the way and give you one that's kind of lighthearted, but still a legit fear, and then one that, as I get older, I am sensing is a real fear of mine. The first one, a little more lighthearted, but my whole life I've been deathly afraid of roaches. Like, I cannot, like, I see a roach approach, and my whole body reacts to it. And shout outs to Rick Bookfor, a longtime Seacoaster who recently passed away. He had a business that sprayed for bugs, and I'm telling you, we never saw a roach. And if we saw one, he said, call, because you don't see one roach. That's not acceptable. And it changed my life, because when you grow up in the South, my mom was the cleanest lady imaginable. You could eat off of her floors. There's still once in a while going to be a big old cockroach that just comes out of nowhere because you're in Charleston, and Rick Bookfor took that away. Thank goodness. So that's my lighthearted fear. My serious fear is experiencing pain. Like, I am thinking, like, my uncle had a situation where he had a catheter, for instance. I've never had a catheter. And I am absolutely just so afraid to get a catheter, to the point where I think I would ask to be put to sleep in order to get that in and out.
Do needles bother you?
I don't want to look at it. So, yeah, I guess maybe a little bit. But, I don't like the thought of, like, when I see movies where torturing is portrayed, like I'm watching a movie that's basically two missionaries that go, it's Martin Worcestershire sauce, that guy, Scorsese. But basically these two priest missionaries go to 17th century Japan, and there's definitely some torturing involved in stuff. And that's like, that is, maybe that's everybody. I mean, maybe I think all of us would be afraid of being tortured, but maybe some of us don't think about it. To me, it's just like, I could not. What's your fear?
Well, I'm gonna I'm not wanting to sign up for what you just said, like
being tortured.
Well, I'm just saying the whole catheter thing. I'm not.
Yeah.
I ain't signing up for that just to sign up for it. But
what does that mean? That I mean, last option? That has to be a very last option.
In other words,
for
he's not gonna own that as one of his fears.
Yeah,
but he's
that's
also
a given.
saying, like,
exactly. That's a given. Okay.
Yeah. Fear?
Just say you ain't got no fears.
Nah, you know what's crazy? I don't have fears like doing stuff, because I ain't gonna do nothing dumb to where I'm gonna be scared. Like, I ain't gonna go swimming in the ocean, so there is no fear of sharks. Or I'm not going to have a fear of lions, because I ain't going to be running around in Africa being stupid. But, like, a fear of, like...
Sorry to all the missionaries out there.
Hey, listen, I'm going to Honduras, and I ain't got a fear of snakes.
You're really afraid of snakes, aren't you?
Yeah, I don't like snakes.
Yeah, see, now that don't bother me. But, like, I have a fear of failing as a dad, because I didn't necessarily have an example. And I don't want my kid to be without, like, at all.
Yeah.
So, like, that's truly the only fear I've ever had. Like, everything else I can figure out. I can figure out how to provide. I can figure out, whatever. But knowing that I'm making the right decision when it comes to her scares me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dude, you took that deep.
I know.
I was like, he's got righteous fear, and I'm going to tell about a mouse or something.
Well, I mean,
that's the
again, you putting I ain't going hunting. I ain't worried about none of that mess.
Come on, you're not going to at least own bears as a fear?
No.
Because he's not going to put himself in that situation.
I can show you a text message thread where you
Then I said, what? If y'all go to this cabin, I'm going to get COVID. Like, that's what I said.
Hey, I will say this, because it's just not my nature to hear something like that and not respond. And that could possibly be annoying. And I think for me, it's like the pastor in me. But the first thing that comes to mind is the fact that you have that thought in your head to an outsider's perspective, like someone who's outside of that relationship with you and your daughter. Just the fact that you have that thought in your head, to me, signifies your heart's in the right place. Thus, you don't have to worry about that, because there are a lot of people, that's the last thing on their mind. They're not even thinking about it. Just the fact that you're thinking about it, you're way ahead of the game.
Yeah, you would say that.
Yeah, go ahead.
But it's not necessarily the bad things that I worry about. It's I do so much for Malia. Am I spoiling her? Am I making her entitled?
Gotcha.
It's
right. Right. Parenting stuff. Are you messing her up, sort of thing? Yeah.
Gotcha. Like, at some point, I want to get her off the books, and someone's going to have to be able to deal with her, and I don't want to have her too jacked up. Like, that's the truth of the matter.
Yeah. I love how this conversation is unfolding, how I look. I'm like, I don't like pain. Please don't hurt me. And he's like, my kid. That's it. Yeah. Anything else? Let's go. Yeah. What about you, Jeff?
I mean, I guess the biggest thing for me that I can think of is rats.
Really?
Anything with a tail that doesn't have like fur on it freaks me out. And
so I don't even, rodents?
Yeah. And I don't know where that came from, but Are we
talking all the way up to like armadillos?
Yeah, I don't like those either. I would shoot those. But seriously, if I see a mouse or a rat, especially a rat because of the tail, I would run right out of this room right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so
my goodness.
Great.
I've got to dig a little bit. You said you would shoot that armadillo.
Yes.
So if you're driving down an interstate and you see an armadillo, you're going to pull off on the side of the road, get your shotgun, just shoot that bad boy?
If I'm in my yard and one's digging up my yard, yes,
digging
I would
up
shoot
your
it.
yard.
Yes,
Gotcha. Okay. All right, Roy.
They're going to mess with me now. I'm going to find rats around the office.
Oh, yeah. Come on.
I'm not going to do that.
No, I do know that.
I mean, you've already said one. Yeah, I have a fear of snakes. I have sharks. I don't. Yeah. I have probably an irrational fear of sharks.
Do you go out deep then? Probably avoid.
I hate the ocean. Can't stand the ocean.
Like, would you go on a cruise?
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're protected from sharks on a cruise. I
love cruises.
Okay, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
But no, here's a real fear. The older I get, it's funny. It's because this has never been the case my entire life, but recently, I think I'm becoming claustrophobic.
Really?
Man, if I just watch something, if I watched something the other day, a reel came across my Facebook feed, and it was this person climbing down into this underground bunker. And it was like the shaft going down was just big enough to fit down into it. And like when they got down below, it was just big enough for them to like lay down underground and go. And I was like, that would freak me out.
So I'm gonna tell you something that's gonna really freak you out. Then
what's that?
You know how when you see a program as a kid, like a TV show, and it just leaves an imprint. I mean, and this one left an imprint. I think it was Alfred Hitchcock. So my dad and my brother, who's 2 years older, they watch Alfred Hitchcock, and sometimes I would connect with the episode in this one. So there was a woman who I think was in prison. And she became friends, maybe even romantically, with the guy that took care of the dead bodies of people that passed away in the prison. So they concocted this plan of how she was going to get out. So basically what they were going to do is the next person that died, he was going to sneak her into the coffin and then actually bury her and then bring her back up from the ground, and then she would be free. So the last scene, she is in the coffin and she's all giddy because she's like, I'm getting out. And she's like, well, let me just see who this person is. She turns around and it's the guy who she was making the plan with.
Stop it.
And so she's in a coffin alive.
Yes.
That thought probably kills you.
I think I now have a claustrophobic fear.
That story did it.
Yeah. Did you in. Like some people would say, like some people, like my wife, like, she says she's claustrophobic, and like just like being in like for her, part of that definition is being in a place where she thinks that she can't get out, like an airplane. She doesn't like flying because she feels like she couldn't get out if she wanted to. That doesn't freak me out. It's the confined space. It's like not having enough room to turn, to get up, to be able to sit up.
Right.
Like just that thought freaks me out.
Yeah. All right, guys, it's Jim Wellman in our conversation about megachurches. If we're a megachurch, this is a mega podcast, right?
It is.
We call it a mega podcast.
Be interesting.
You're talking on a mega podcast. Well, thank you so much for being here on the Seacoast podcast. I'm a Southern boy, so I almost called you Mr. Jim, but I bet you're not that much older than me. So it's Jim Wellman. And how many times have you been on a megachurch podcast to talk about your book on megachurches? Is this a first?
I think it could be the first. Yeah.
Nice. So High on God, how megachurches have won the heart of America. So is it safe to say that you have done major research on megachurches?
Yeah, I have. We really were at it for about 8 years.
Dang.
Yeah. And, we went through several cycles where we tried to prove that megachurches were the, kind of the eye of the storm of evil in the world. And then we came around to believing, in fact, they're one of the most positive and powerful purveyors of human connection that the world has seen.
Dang.
In a certain way.
Yeah.
So all the research is clearly evident that megachurches are doing good work.
Awesome. It's going to get fun. It's going to be fun to get into. Why don't you tell our listeners what your background is, including what led you to ask these questions and motivate you to do this research? But what do you do?
Yeah,
well, you're a pastor, right? Presbyterian Church?
Well, I was a pastor in the Presbyterian Church, and really, in a sense, in much of my life, I was a part of megachurches, and I just didn't know it. We didn't talk about them as megachurches. University Presbyterian Church in Seattle, Washington, had well over 3,000, 4,000 people going to the church. The college ministry with Steve Hayner was 900 to 1,000 every Tuesday night. None of that exists, by the way, at least in our part of the woods, which is that's another story. And I went to the University of Chicago Divinity School to get my PhD. Ended up working at a liberal megachurch, in downtown Chicago, and it turned out, it was kind of obvious that I should do my PhD dissertation on the church, and I did. I didn't really even call it a megachurch at the time, but that's what it was. So it's it's been a process, and then from there I came back to the Pacific Northwest. Worked in some churches off and on, and then got a position at the University of Washington. I'm a professor in comparative religion in the Jackson School of International Studies. So I do a lot of different kinds of research besides churches, but that's one of the main areas.
Yeah. So what was your motivation? It sounded like at the very beginning of the process, you were setting out to prove how horrible megachurches were. How did that evolve?
Yeah, it was. I think it was probably because we're talking now. Oh boy, we're talking 12 years ago, and some of the scandals were coming out about megachurches, and especially on TV, megachurch stars. And there was a tendency, among people who describe themselves as liberals to automatically infer from that all evangelical churches, all megachurches, in some way were stained by that, by those kinds of people. And so we began to think there's got to be a way to understand why and how these churches work. And why do they lead eventually to these scandals? It turned out, after going over the research in a very careful way, that was as far from the truth as you can get in terms of scandals. At least we found scandals, I think, in about 1% of all megachurches.
Say that again. 1%.
Yeah, something around 1%.
And do you have an estimated number of megachurches in general, like in America? Like, is there?
I think it's right around 1,700 to 2,000, maybe.
Gotcha.
So that's quite a record, and it's hysterical in a sense, because I grew up in a more liberal West Coast atmosphere where, I think a lot of people, and especially today, just assume that churches are the problem and not the answer. And in a sense that, liberal America, right, simply assumes that. And so, sort of to kick people in the knee, I went the other direction. And we wrote this book as a way to say, these churches are incredibly efficient, effective, sort of tools that give people and help people to flourish. If you want to have human flourishing, you want people to give towards others. You want them to be in groups together. You want them to feel empowered. You want them to believe that there's a future. You want them to have hope in the possibility of a future. So, for all those reasons. Oh, and you want people to be able to join groups that keep them, in their ethical and moral frameworks.
Yeah.
And enable them to get to know new people who are, encouraging them to help and live for Christ, right? So for all those reasons, I was completely and utterly wrong.
Yeah. So am I connecting the dots? Would this be accurate to say that you're doing research on what I think would be, and sometimes these labels aren't helpful, sometimes they are. I would say in this regard they are, but you're doing research on what most people would say is primarily representing more conservative theology. Because you mentioned a megachurch that's super liberal. I would imagine that most megachurches that are thriving are a little more conservative in their theology, but you would probably be more open or swayed to some liberal approaches to different cultural things that the church would see differently. So it's not even like you're on this side necessarily trying to defend any sort of turf. Like you probably don't see exactly eye to eye with a lot of the churches that you're doing the research on.
That's a good question. It's a long story. My my wife passed away in 2014. And it was, it was very sad and it was tragic, and I won't get into the details, but it caused an eruption in my person and my soul, and I was at the same time doing this evangelical research on megachurches, and that was right around the time where I kind of went through a conversion of realizing, working with my partners, that these churches were actually churches that engaged culture, helped the communities, and empowered families. And right in the midst of that, so I became more able to listen to evangelicalism. And right at the end of about 9 months of mourning, I happened to be at a restaurant. I was by myself on Bainbridge Island where I live, and met somebody, and she turned out to be an evangelical Christian.
Yeah.
And long story short, I married her. But I don't think it would have been possible for me to fall in love with her, except for the fact that I really understood evangelicalism in a much deeper way than I ever had before. Because
of all the research?
Totally.
Yeah.
So, it's impacted me in more than one way. And we went on to have 2 more kids and have a wonderful life together. But yeah, and two, I've started, because of her, in part, I started going to a more conservative Presbyterian church. It's not fully my cup of tea. We disagree on some certain things, but I totally understand what they're doing, how they're doing it, and why they're doing it. So I'm a participant observer who can value what I'm looking at.
Yeah. Yeah.
If that makes sense to you.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I love how you compared megachurches to little towns. Like it's their recreation of towns. You take care of your neighbors. I'll even expand it, at least over here at Seacoast. We open up our town during the week for other people and other organizations to use. And then on Sundays, we open up our town for worship services that anyone can come to without necessarily saying that they're affiliated with our town. It's just a big old, everybody can come over. But I love the town analogy. You want to go a little deeper into that?
Oh yeah, no, I think it's really critical. At the heart of this research is human beings have a desire for acceptance. And churches, megachurches in particular, are incredibly good at making people feel like when they come into the megachurch as if, this is my home. This is the place I feel comfortable. This is a place where I'm being accepted. And so, that's really critical to, one of the problems that megachurches have is that they really need to grow and continue to grow, right? They lose members for different reasons, and they need growth to fund the organization. And I don't mean that in a cynical way. I just simply mean, when you're running a big organization like a megachurch, you need turnover, and you need to add members. And so megachurches are incredibly good at making people feel accepted right away, which is critical to whether they'll come back or not, right? If the first 5 minutes of the experience is bad, people will more or less turn away. And that's why, let's be honest, liberal churches are not as warm, not as accepting, not as cheery, let's put it that way. People simply don't feel like they're at home. And so when you talk to megachurches, and when we did in our interviews, they often felt like, oh, this is my family. This is my home. This is the place where I go to be recharged. And
you said that's uncommon in more liberal churches. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
It's uncommon. There are exceptions to any generalization.
Sure.
One of the, as I said, when I was in Chicago, in downtown Chicago, in that Fourth Presbyterian Church, which I wrote a book on, and clearly it was a liberal megachurch, which is very rare, and they had made the community feel as if it was. People were welcome, and they had a very efficient system to make that happen. So liberal churches can do it. They simply are not as efficient at that process. And evangelicals also have this deep desire, of course, and I'm sure you understand this, that every person is seen as a person that can, come to Christ. And there's a deep motivation, right, to bring people to Christ. And a part of the problem, a fundamental problem with liberal churches is that they don't have that motivation. They simply assume that every way is okay. And so they're not trying to lead people to Christ per se. So at an evangelical church, you have that motivation. And we saw that over and over again as we visited these churches. And it was, just a funny story. Mm-hmm. I took a group of my students to a megachurch. I think we were doing a small seminar of undergraduates on megachurches. And we went to a church in Seattle, and I heard not too long afterwards that one of my students had converted. And I felt a little bit guilty about it because, you as a teacher, you're not trying to convert your students necessarily. But it just goes to show you again the power of these churches. and the motivation, right? Again, I would say I used to think, okay, this is what I used to think, that megachurches were manipulative and that they were trying to exploit people, and they needed the cash to keep these monstrous buildings going. But we found, in our research at least, we didn't discover any of those kind of cynical motivations going on.
Yeah.
And they are some of the happiest places that we experienced as human beings, that these were places that people felt at home and welcomed and loved.
Yeah. So High on God is the name of the book. That comes across, has like a little cynical tone to it, maybe intentional or unintentional. What do you mean by that? High on God.
Yeah. I think by the end we didn't feel it was cynical. We simply believe that one of the fundamental desires that people have is a desire for the wow, right? They want the wow in their partner. They want the wow in their lives, in their careers, in their relationships, in their families. And megachurches were incredibly good at creating a kind of wow feeling, like something is happening here, something is about to happen here, and that kind of engagement, kind of created what we called a shared mood. A shared mood. In other words, people felt like, wow, something's really occurring. Now, who knows? Whatever you want to say about the Holy Spirit. What we think is that human beings, in a certain sense, are looking for emotional energy at their center. And what I kind of came to believe, and I to some extent I still believe this, is that emotional energy is in some form the representation of the Holy Spirit. Right? Which empowers, which heals, which leads, which encourages, which, gives people enthusiasm. And humans, whether they're religious or not, want that. I think that's why they go to football games and baseball games, in part. But what's funny about sports is that it's really inefficient, right? Half the time you're losing. You go home sad. You have to eat a lot of popcorn and you probably feel crummy afterwards.
Yeah.
But churches are, I think, much more efficient in giving and delivering that wow, that sense of hope. It's, you as a pastor, you know this very well. The hope that passes, the belief or the hope that passes all understanding. Even though, okay, let's say we go to church and we have cancer. We may be dying, and the gospel says you are accepted, you are loved. God will heal you in this world or the next. And so, in the midst of that, that chaos in your own life, you're feeling uplifted, and the possibility of a future.
Yeah.
And the possibility of healing. There's a great book that an author I think you should interview, Lisa Miller, called The Awakened Brain. I think it's a fascinating book on the fact what she did a lot. She does brain research, and basically she watches brains on religion, on spirituality.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating. It's really worth talking to her about it, because basically she found that there's a part of the brain that responds directly to spiritual activity, and you can basically watch it light up, and so I think, and she sort of she's Jewish, so she's not pushing for evangelical faith so much, but she certainly is pushing for the fact that religious experience, which I would call emotional energy within this context, is tremendously what it does is it gives resilience and hope. The brain feels it or experiences it as resilience and hope. The hope that passes all understanding, right? I mean, it all makes sense.
Yeah.
Once you really look at the whole picture. Would you
go so far as to say that from a purely scientific point of view, some of the things that are the big wow moments that are good for people, would you suppose that even if it wasn't the Holy Spirit and it was just an emotional reaction to lots of people singing some pretty songs together, just for the sake of argument, I mean, I'll say at our church, I do believe that it's the Holy Spirit, but if it wasn't, would it still be something that science would say that's good for people to have that emotional boost?
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I think that's why, America is going through, many different types of crises. But one of the crises they're not going through is that they continue to attend megachurches. Now, it's clearly a place, and this is interesting. I think most megachurches are apolitical. They don't wear their politics on their wrist. And don't preach about it. That's one of the reasons why people don't want to go to more liberal Protestant churches. They just don't want to hear it. It's too depressing. And I can totally understand that. So what I would say, yes, of course, people are always looking for hope, and they find it in these churches for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, as a fellow believer, do you find things in which you'd put in the category of taking things so far? Like, I have heard that there are, I don't know if it would be churches or a church, but a large church that does something along these lines. They make an altar call asking people to come and, have God heal you from addiction or save you, but they had already pre-planned for 40 people who they know and say, hey, we need y'all to be the first ones because everybody, there's a lot of people that need to do it, but they may lack the courage. So you guys do it first. Me personally, that makes me feel a little squirmy. How do you respond to something like that? Because with what you're saying, it would sound like, maybe that's not so bad if that's what people need. They need like some emotional interacting.
Yeah. I don't know. That's a tricky question. That's good. That's a good question though. I like it. Yeah. I don't know. That's, of course, when you look at revivalism across the ages, in America, that has occurred. I think there's many. I don't know this. Certainly, Amy Semple McPherson in the early 20th century, she was an artist. She was a pastor, but she was an artist of certainly manipulating people to come forward and to give and to produce, sort of Christians. And she was beautiful and she could sing and do the whole thing.
Yep.
But what's interesting about that example, of course, is that, in Los Angeles, she also, her church was one of the most important deliverers of food to the poor, right? And the poor don't necessarily come to church, but they certainly benefit from the church, which is, because middle-class people come to church. The poor generally don't, but they need the benefits of it. So now, what would you say? Her manipulation is bad, and yet it does feed the poor. So it's a very interesting question. And that kind of gets us. I don't know if you want to go on to the next one, but the desire for a leader is, one of the basically the third factor that we found in these churches. And, a reliable leader who, and they tend to be, male. About a third of them are non-white or of another ethnicity. And so this kind of, what's interesting, there are some female leaders in megachurches, which is interesting in and of itself, but certainly a strong male leader is incredibly important for people to feel this kind of shared focus of attention. And they become a leader and a guide for many, 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 many people.
Yeah. And you use the word leader. And when I think about this part of the discussion, I'm always typically saying the issue is that people are after heroes. And I think that is when it turns into a problem. Leader, not so much. Like, leadership is important in almost every aspect of life. It's funny. It was kind of doing it as an experiment, but it was also part of my heart and a different expression of worship. But here I am I have a church family here at this megachurch, been here forever. And I also started a house church. And so, completely different vibe. And my intentions initially was basically to downplay any sort of leadership I bring to the table. Hey, this is a completely contributive sort of deal. We don't need a head guy. And what I started to learn is you may not need one, but you need a few people to take initiative and to lead and to keep things going. And it just became clear as day that it's not a need for leadership that's the problem. I think in churches, it's when we want those leaders to be heroes, and that's when it gets unhealthy.
Yeah. I'm sure we don't need to name names here, but they're, like I said, less than 1% have these problems, and it's always most frequently about the leader, where the leader either, his ego gets, it's always a he, the leader gets too big, ego gets too big, and usually it's about power, money, or sex, big surprise, right?
Yep.
That inevitably there's the fall. I think some academics or some people sort of take joy in that, but I certainly don't, because I think it does really hurt people when pastors fall and make mistakes.
Yeah.
So it's again, I don't have a cynical view towards the church, and so I don't wish for anyone's fall. And I hope the church, continues to be a blessing to people. So that's kind of my point of view on that.
Yeah,
one.
for sure. Do you think with what you've learned from your research, are megachurches going to be here for the long haul? We have is statistician? Is that a real word? Someone that works with statistics?
Yes. Statistician. Yeah.
Statistician. All right.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. So there's a guy here that's super smart with church and trends and all of that. And he supposes that the very small house church type churches will continue to grow. The mega churches will continue to grow. The middle-sized churches are the ones that are feeling the effects of the church's decline.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think that it's that middle range of churches usually have pastors who are good, but they're not necessarily great. And so they're kind of caught in between. And so, Americans being people who like to go to the best, they want entertainment and they want the best to listen to on Sunday morning. So they may tend to go to the megachurch where the pastor is apparent, is charismatic, etc. So that really, in that sense, you might suggest, and I don't know if this is even true or not, but this would be worth the research, is do megachurches really undercut the ministries of churches in their region when they come into those regions? And I'm not sure what the I don't know if that's good or bad or what.
Like Starbucks to the local coffee shop sort of thing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the local shops just go down. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, what other things are you working on currently? You have a lot of books out there. I think you even have a book that does it contrast more of a liberal theology with conservative theology?
Yeah, no, there's an earlier book on that, and that was really the reason I went into the megachurch megachurch research, because it was clear that these the liberal Protestant churches were kind of dying quite literally, as they are now, and at one time, of course, in the 1970s and 80s, they were the churches that were surrounding our campus at the University of Washington and full of people. But now what's interesting about the University of Washington is all those churches have been torn down, these beautiful cathedrals torn down, and they're gone. Wow. I don't think that's good at all. But anyway. Yeah. But in terms of my research, I've done a course on a life worth living for 10 years. And it's just a course that I train undergraduates on how to make a life worth living, and using, to some extent, the results of the megachurches, not so much the religion, but what makes a life worth living. That to me is it's an interesting research question. And the students just come out of it with such joy and such hope for their futures that it's sort of taken over my life in a certain sense.
Yeah, that's cool.
The other thing I'm thinking about, and this might be interesting to you, is I want to do a global biography of Jesus.
Oh yeah.
So I want to interview folks who believe in Jesus across the world.
Dude, I love that. Man, you're on to so many discussions that I just find so fascinating. That's cool.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of my next thing.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for sharing your time with us. It's it's been a joy. I love talking about this kind of stuff, and we'll have whatever links you give us as far as people being able to find you and your books and all that. So we appreciate it, sir.
Okay. Take care.
See, I accidentally worked in, sir.
I love it.
Have a good rest of the day.
Okay. You too.
You've been listening to the Things You Won't Hear on Sunday Seacoast podcast. In the show notes, you'll see a link to our Facebook group page. Also, we'd love for you to consider subscribing so you get these episodes downloaded right when they come out. Thanks so much for listening.